There we go. Okay, we're going to start this Public Works and Finance Committee meeting for the City of Moscow. This is August 24th, and we'll wait for Gary Reedner will be here shortly, and Jim Boland I thought was going to sit in for Walter. He's not here yet, but you know what? We're still going to start. So at any rate, we have the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, and
look good to me.
That sounds good to me. So the minutes will stand approved. And so now the next item is going to be it's a public meeting, but it's not a public meeting. It's not really a public hearing, but it has to do with the lot division for 335 Louder Avenue, and Rebecca Couch is going to present on that. Rebecca?
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
So like you said, we have a lot division before you for a parcel address is 335 Louder Avenue. Property is located southwest of the Louder Avenue curve here. We have Taylor Avenue up here to the north, and this is Ridge Road that heads up the hill to the south. The subject property is within the R4 multifamily residential zoning district, and as you can see, all surrounding properties are also within the R4 zone. Within the R4 zone, the minimum lot width is 50 feet. And the minimum lot area is 5,000 square feet. There's a front setback requirement of 15 feet for a structure or 20 feet for a garage that faces the front yard, and side yard setbacks of 5 feet or the sum of the 2 yards that need to equal a minimum of 15 feet, and the rear yard is 20 feet. This exhibit shows the proposed lot division, which would result in 3 new parcels. We have parcel A to the north would contain the north of the subject property, parcel B in the middle and the southwest, and then parcel C in the southeast. Each of the parcels would meet the required minimum lot area of 5,000 square feet, with parcel A at 6,294, parcel B at 5,174, and parcel C at 5,001 square feet. Parcel A exceeds the minimum lot width of 50 feet. It has approximately 73 feet of lot width. And parcel B and parcel C are proposed to be configured as flag lots. Flag lots require that the flag pole portion maintain a 20-foot width for a distance not to exceed 150 feet. And both of those parcels are proposed to meet that requirement. The flagpole portion of parcel B is proposed to be a private access easement for the 3 parcels, and it is proposed that a curb cut would be located here off of Louder Avenue, and then access to the lots would come from within that private easement for each of the lots. Here's the proposed lot division just shown over the aerial image. And then just going back real quick, you can see there's an existing accessory structure here in the north, and it does meet the required minimum setbacks for side yard setbacks. Per City of Moscow requirements for lot divisions, property owners within 600 feet have been notified, and the site was posted 7 days prior to today's meeting. Staff is recommending approval of the lot division after receiving public comment, with one condition, that there only be 1 vehicle approach permitted along Louder Avenue. And as I understand, there was an email that was distributed to you before the meeting. We had 1 email comment submitted to us, and we had 2 individuals speak to us in the office prior to today, and they each have the same concern regarding the
Egress.
Yep, yeah. Off of Louder Avenue. So with that, I can answer any questions you have.
Art, I think you had a question or two. The one I had has already been answered, and that's the ingress-egress. I have another question pertaining to that, but you go ahead, Art.
Oh, I was just kicking around the same topic that seems to come up for everyone, is the ingress-egress from there, because that is kind of a difficult curve right there with a downhill slope. Are there any other potential access points? It didn't look like there were.
No, they're not. That's the only frontage on a public street is Louder.
So with a 3-lot configuration, and given the difficulties of the curb, does the Community Development Department think that that's going to be able to accommodate any traffic generated from the 3 lots? moving in and out?
Well, the curb cut would be approved by the Public Works Department, and each lot within the city is permitted to have one point of access.
That point hasn't been decided yet?
Well, it's going to have to be in that 20 feet of
It would-
Lot B someplace.
That's right.
That's what I would, yeah.
But, and also, the ground slopes off to the side there somewhat.
Make it louder, please, so I can hear. I live at 334.
Yeah. Come on, so it's mostly just, just turn it off.
Speak up.
So anyway, given the topography there, is there going to be enough room to construct a driveway and a landing pad up to Louder?
That would all be reviewed at the time that someone is to install a curb cut. That, there's no plans for construction of a curb cut at this time. It's just the lot division, and that would all be reviewed by the engineering department.
Yeah, it could be kind of a difficult issue if you issue the division and then have to go back and say, whoops, sorry, now you can't get in because of engineering considerations.
So your question is whether or not it can be made to city standards?
Might be something for the applicant to discuss after we get into the public testimony part.
Well, actually, my question would be, why would we allow the applicant to spend the money to ask for lot division without this having been figured out already, that there is actually going to be an acceptable ingress-egress point?
Well, we don't require design or what they're going to construct on it. It's a lot division, whether it meets the minimum standards, whether it meets our standards for lot configuration. If it meets those standards, then the developer, the owner, will have to come in and he will have to meet whatever city street standards are for construction and for access.
No, I understand that. As I recall, Louder Avenue has a concrete divider between the two lanes. Is that correct?
Yes.
So there again, that would be another problem. It looks to me like, how are they going to get in and out of there from either lane?
Yeah, and I didn't mention that it would be right in, right out only. So right out, onto
Makes
Louder.
access from one direction and egress into one direction, right?
Sure. Yep.
Okay.
Kind of like a standard one-way street configuration, but
Yeah, I guess it'd be in conformance with the existing structures on Louder in that same area. In other words, they wouldn't be able to cross the divider and go the
Right.
other way.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else, Art?
not right now, but I'd like to hear what other people have to say.
Certainly. This is not a public hearing. However, I will invite some short comments from folks that have some concerns about this, other than the ingress-egress. We know that there's a concern about that right now, and that will have to be addressed at a later date through engineering studies and a traffic study on that. But if there's any other concerns, pro or con for this, I would invite you to come forward and give us your name and your address and state your point. Sir, come on up.
I'm Ralph Nielsen.
Could I ever speak into the mic, Ralph?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ralph Nielsen. Nielsen like the TV ratings. N-I-E-L-S-E-N.
Need to speak up too, Ralph, so everybody
Okay.
can hear you.
And
Could we have your address, Mr. Nielsen?
334 Lauder, right across the street from this
Thank you.
tenant business. Now, where did I put my card? Oh, here we are. Yes, I have lived there for 36 years, and I have driven on Lauder, which is the correct pronunciation, by the way. It's a Scottish name. And for 50 years, because I worked for 30 years at the University Library. And so I'm well acquainted with this street. And I'm afraid this will be a very dangerous driveway, where I'll put it, because a vehicle coming from the west, heading east here, cannot swerve to the east because there's a wall there, and some places it's very high. And it's just around the curve, and they can't see anything till they come to this flat area right above it, where there is a sort of an egress area about 20 feet, something like that. There's no problem because it's up on the flat. But down there, this is on the curve, on the hillside. And it's also down here, the junction of Ridge Road and Lauder. It's a very busy area, and that's why Tyler Palmer, a couple of years ago, had the yellow line painted right across the front of my lot, because that's a very important junction. And we get a lot of traffic there, and a lot of U-turns. Anybody who lives, just what you were asking about, who lives up behind me here, has got to go down, coming from the west, has come down here, one way, and make a U-turn, junction of Lauder Avenue and Ridge Road, and go up the other side. So there's that problem already.
So, excuse me, so Tyler stripped parking off that area?
Yes.
It made that a no parking
Yes.
zone? Okay.
And there is now a fire hydrant, but that hasn't been painted with a yellow line quite yet, so students are parking there already. But they don't get tickets. And the other thing is, in the wintertime, my late wife and I would, every winter, we would observe cars getting stuck trying to go up because it's steep and slippery, and they can't make it up. And conversely, on this side we're concerned about, they can't stop because it's slippery. And anybody stuck going in and out of there, there's a possibility of an accident. And however, a computer friend of mine ascertained that the people who want to own this development also own the property next door. And they do have a driveway up to several other rental properties which they have. I would suggest that all they need to do is extend that driveway from Deacon Extension Street. And that should, everybody should be happy and safe.
Okay.
I'm willing to answer any questions.
Which side was the common ownership? Was that to the north or to the south side?
To the west.
It's the west side.
To the west, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, by that old house there.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other folks who would like to make a comment?
You need to come sit back down.
Sorry. One more suggestion. Did I mention that the people next door also, so they extend the driveway? I'm sorry, I did say that, yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That would be my positive suggestion.
Okay.
Okay, other than that,
I'm the owner.
Okay, you need to come.
Could I go to the map and just point out a couple
no,
of things?
you can point out with the pointer.
Got a
Got a
laser
pointer.
pointer.
Can I have- give us your name and your address, sir?
My name is Otto Kais. We live at 1320 Deacon Avenue Extension, which is the green thing. Okay, that's this property right here. As far as the ingress and egress, I realize that's been taken into consideration. An easement has been given around this area in order to facilitate more landscaping work and to allow for a turnaround and safe access and ingress and egress. As far as coming up from this area right here, there is a somewhat of an embankment here, and cars are often stalled up in this area, and I would say probably this property right here and ones down here have essentially the same issue as far as ingress and egress that this piece of property would have, just in a different direction. The driveway that was mentioned is clear over here. There are a couple of buildings back in this area. It would be, to access it from that side would be really very impractical. And as a city zoning there allows, there's a I'm not sure this is 12-plex or it's a multi-unit apartment here. City zoning would allow something like that to be put in that, but I really don't want to see that happen. That's one of the reasons why we have configured this in the way we have. If anybody has seen this particular building that we have built here, it was in the place of what used to be a chicken coop, cute little building, but it was sitting right on almost about a foot off the property line, and was it was unusable. So this is a nice looking building, and if I would like to see something else of that sort put on these two lots to make it a unified community of sorts.
Okay. Anything?
Not just yet.
Nope.
Thank you.
Anything else for us, Becky?
That's all that I have.
Unless we have questions for you, huh? I think it was a good point was brought up that by zoning right that another apartment complex could be built there without any requests for any kind of a lot division. So it meets all zoning requirements,
Correct.
meets all setback requirements, which are part of the zoning requirements. The only real issue that staff has is making certain that there's a single ingress, egress on that. So with that, I'm comfortable on sending this to the full council, however, for full council discussion on that. Is there not a public hearing at
No.
council level on this, however?
No, the public meeting is at this committee level.
Right, but I think it would be a good idea to have this in a
Everybody
full
should have
council discussion on that, so.
Okay.
Okay?
So you want that on the regular agenda?
Yes, I do, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Becky. Next item is, let's see, let me get up to the right spot here.
And I would note, just for the record, that that next council meeting will be on the 8th, which is the day after Labor Day,
Right, Tuesday.
2 weeks from tomorrow.
Okay. Michael Ray, we have a request for a waiver of public improvements for Southgate 3rd Edition.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good afternoon. So we have a request before you today for a waiver and a deferral of public improvements for two pathways within Southgate 3rd Edition of the City of Moscow. It was approved by City Council for preliminary plat on March 3rd, 2008. Contained 6 conditions, and one of those conditions was that a series of pedestrian pathways be dedicated and constructed throughout Southgate 3rd Edition. And the two before you tonight, I've got labeled Path 1, Path 2. Path 1 connects from Hampton Court cul-de-sac down to Notting Hill Drive, and you also have Path 2, which connects down to Flomer to the east. Mr. Michael Salisbury is requesting that Path 1 be waived. There was significant discussion as part of the council meeting that the pathways that connect throughout the subdivision be limited in the number of stairs which are contained within them. After the grading plan had been submitted and reviewed, it's indicated that there's about 21 stairs which are going to be part of Path 1, so he's requesting a waiver of constructing that pathway. Path 2, as you can see, the proposed grading plan is in the solid line, not the dash line. Dash line is current topography on the property. Is requesting a deferral, so not waiving but deferring those the construction of the pathway until such time that the homes are constructed upon those properties. Have an overlay of what we're looking at previously on an aerial. We've got Notting Hill Drive connects to the White Avenue roundabout here in the northwest corner. You've got that Path 1 from Hampton Court to Notting Hill Drive, and you also have the other connection, Path 2, down here to Flomer. The whole intent of the pathways within Southgate 3rd Edition were to eventually connect to Milton Arthur Park, which is going to be part of this phase 3 of Southgate 3rd. And I've got that outlined in red in the northeast corner of your screen. So the intent was to have a shorter pedestrian connection to get to that park. You also have another pathway, which is part of another phase, which would extend here, which would connect to the cul-de-sac and make a shorter distance. And so the construction drawings that were submitted. This is a plan of path number 1. You can see the series of stairs which lead down to Notting Hill Drive. This is proposed to be constructed as a 5-foot wide concrete sidewalk within this 10-foot access path easement. You also have the one in the southeast corner, path 2, proposed to be a 8-foot wide asphalt path. So a little bit difference in the pathways. Staff's recommendation is to have the committee receive the waiver request and provide a recommendation to City Council or provide staff further direction. When staff had taken a look at this proposal and reviewed it, really don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. Path number 1, the waiver request, the distance didn't seem that substantial if you were to just walk through Hampton Court down through Notting Hill Drive. Distance was about double for the properties which were surrounding the cul-de-sac and Hampton Court, and so staff didn't feel that was that substantial of a distance in order to just waive that request. The pathway heading down to Flomer Lane, staff was concerned about the potential for homes to be constructed on that property without the homeowners knowing that there would be a path at some point in the future, and then maybe the challenges with constructing the path at that point once you have established utilities and landscaping and the structures that are constructed on the property. So that was the reasoning, but staff thought we'd leave it up to council to decide on the waiver and the deferral, and I'd certainly be able to answer any questions that you might have on this.
You know, in looking at that, it looks to me like there's only about 5 properties really affected by path number 1.
And that was the discussion that we had internally, was that you just have the ones that are immediately surrounding Hampton Court, which really benefit from that pathway. There isn't a broader benefit from, maybe 10, 15 properties on a larger block that would be utilizing that. Once you hit mid-block on Hampton Court, it begins to equal out, and you have about the same distance as if you were to walk down the access easement or just walk down this typical sidewalk on Notting Hill and Hampton Court.
When it comes to maintaining the paths, is that the city's responsibility to shovel the things in the winter?
Usually the Parks Department handles that maintenance, correct.
So, yeah, it seems like across the street for the next phase is more critical than path 1 to me, but I think that path 2 down to the south side is more critical, and I would like to see that go in as soon as the grading is completed on the lots and not wait for development of the houses. Establish it as part of the larger development and the transportation system within it. So I wouldn't mind seeing number 1 go away just because the distance you have to hoof it is not that much greater. But for 2, I think 2 should go in at the time of the grading and not necessarily the construction of the houses.
Gary?
Mike, what's the grade in here? What's
It's
the
steep.
elevation difference?
Extremely
Steeper there?
steep.
steep.
Yeah,
Steeper than
Yeah.
it is here?
correct.
Okay.
You had an elevation map I was looking at when you put it up there, and it's
Yeah, if you want to switch, we should have it on there, Gary.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you have the natural topography. Each one of those contour lines represents 2-foot elevation change, so you're looking at 40, 50 feet on there. There was a little bit of discussion at the council level in 2008 of potentially running that to the north, but just because of the amount of stairs that would be involved within that, it was then decided that it would head to the west on the current alignment that's shown on your screen there.
Pardon me again.
good.
So, Mike, if you go back to the larger picture, that one. So this is path 2, correct?
Correct.
So path 2 will give access to these neighborhoods to get around to Milton Arthur Park.
And you also have one that's not shown on the screen to the northeast, so if you have the bullseye there for one, there's one that will connect to Lundquist here. So it'll go on this common property line, head north, so there will be a connection there, but that one's not before you today.
Okay, so in the overall scheme of things, this path hooks into these neighborhoods. That was meant to take pedestrians from here, bring them down here, get out on Notting Hill to get over to Milton Arthur Park.
Correct.
Okay, does that, in staff's opinion, getting rid of this one will not limit significantly the access of these neighborhoods?
You have about the same amount of distance at that location. If you were to go north and head down the pathway from here, that's about the same distance as going on the sidewalk and heading down Notting Hill. The one to the northeast here will be affected, minorly affected by that, just because they would come down here and then they head directly west down to Notting Hill. They would just have to follow the sidewalk, but that distance isn't substantial.
Path 2 is designed to benefit neighborhoods that are not within the city of Moscow.
Well, Path 2 would provide connection onto Paradise Path as well. And so originally when Planning and Zoning actually recommended a street right-of-way go through and connect to Flomer, it was then decided at the council level that it should not require a street to go through, but allow some type of pedestrian bicycle connection, and that's why we ended up with an 8-foot wide asphalt path there. But you're connecting, you can, once Ridgeview Second is built, you can drive all the way down from Notting Hill, which connects to Ridgeview down to the highway. But for a pedestrian connection, bicycle connection, they would use that pathway to connect down to Latah Trail. So it would benefit this subdivision.
I can remember a number of years ago when we had that discussion about that path, and I wasn't totally convinced in my own mind that it was necessary or really worthwhile at that time, and I'm still not convinced that it is. So convince me.
I think it's usable just for ingress and egress of people further up over there through to that subdivision. Thank you.
It's the green arrow.
So from anywhere up in here to be able to get through, instead of what amounts to about a 2.5 mile drive to get around the outside, out, around, back, up, you can get through on a bike or pedestrian right into here very easily. And I know there are people that go back and forth now across the field to get back in there. And I think it's a usable, utilitarian, and necessary trail to have through there.
Well, if you look at the properties on Flomer and Lundquist, in order to get to Milton Arthur Park, where it may seem like it's a short distance, they'd have to go all the way back out on State Highway 8, go all the way down to Ridgeview when it's constructed, all the way up to Notting Hill. And in this scenario, they would just have to go to the end of Flomer, take a short pedestrian pathway which connects to Hampton and Notting Hill, and on down the hill, and provide half the distance and park access. So I think it provides a benefit to the adjacent neighborhoods, not only the Southgate 3rd Edition.
Okay, I'm convinced.
But wait, there's more.
That's why I suddenly became convinced. Hi, Les. How you doing?
Good afternoon. If I may,
You
sounds
may.
like you're convinced. But as Mike mentioned, the recommendations from P&Z and from staff at that point, frankly, were that Flomer and I believe Lundquist be connected to the west, and that was consistent with the city's approach on extension of streets, so that as the city continues to grow, we don't end up with these dead-end type situations. At that time, the council chose not to do that and did say, well, let's at least make the pedestrian bicycle connections. One of the things to think about in that decision-making process was the thought that there will come a time when this Flomer Lane area is annexed into the city. And so it will then become part of the city street network, and our practice in the last decade or so has been to make as many connections through the system, at least with pedestrian bicycle routes, even if we can't do a vehicle route. So that was really a lot of the reason for those two pathways going to those streets in lieu of actually constructing street connections. So I would encourage the council to continue down that path, so to speak, and allow those neighborhoods to have access into the city and vice versa, because as the city grows, of course, then that's a service we'd want to provide anyway.
Gary?
Yeah, Les just made the point I was going to make, and that is that, being adjacent to the city, there's starting to be development surrounding this area. It's been the city's policy that county islands will be annexed into the city. This will end up either being a county island or close to it. and will avail themselves of city services. So it will probably, in the next several years at least, there will be a discussion of annexation of those properties. And I think the point that was made back at P&Z and Council back in '08 or whenever this was discussed was the isolation for pedestrians and bicycles of those two county subdivisions at this point.
I don't disagree that eventually annexation is something that'll have to be looked at a number of years down the road. And, you know, you can even go further than that. As the city has got some isolated islands right now that should be annexed, and because of our policy of not doing forced annexation, they haven't been. This may be a policy that's going to have to be looked at later on down the road, because we can't continue to have these islands of county property within the city limits. So I'm convinced that the path is needed. And I understand the part where he doesn't really want to put the path in right now because the grading hasn't been done to level yet to where it needs to be. So
Well, I don't mind, as soon as the grading's complete, I would like to see it constructed at the same time the streets are constructed.
I
and
think
put
that's
it
the
in there,
intent,
but
isn't it?
No, they wanted to wait until after the houses were developed, according to what it says here.
Correct.
And I'm not willing to extend that
Does say that.
time frame until house construction, because I want it there first so there can be no question that the fact that there's going to be a path next to your house. And also, it's part of the overall transportation network that should go in as part of the fundamental infrastructure of any subdivision.
Gary?
So just so we have clear direction, is it your direction then that path one would not be necessary and you'd relieve the developer of the construction of that path?
Correct.
Yes.
So is that public right-of-way now, Mike?
It would be an easement, but we could waive that, still retain the easement, and
Okay.
we could proceed that way.
So your recommendation is that you're recommending to council that path one not be constructed and not be required in this subdivision, but the path two you wish to retain and you wish to have it constructed as soon as final grading is completed.
Right.
I'll go along with Art on that.
Yeah, with the street.
Because the
construction.
request is graded and the dwellings constructed, so we'll drop the construction part on the dwellings, and once the grading is done, the streets are in, the path has to be put in.
That's how I see it.
Okay? I believe that can go on the consent agenda. Okay, thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Next item is we have an Assistance to Firefighters Grant Award. This is for a thermal imaging camera. Jen Pifter.
And I will be handling that.
Okay.
Jen's recently had a little dental work done, so she wasn't comfortable in presenting. So
But it would have been more entertaining.
yeah, and she was just covering for Elisa, so I'm third string at this point. This is a good thing for the city. There was an application made for 6 thermal imaging cameras. The fire department will utilize these cameras to take thermal images, of course, of fire scenes. They're a lot better than we have 2, I believe, at this point that are not in good shape. So an Assistance to Firefighters grant was identified with a 10% match, and we were approved for it, which is really good. The chief is very excited about getting these and thinks they will greatly add to the safety of both his firefighters and the public. So it seems like a good thing. We have money budgeted in the FY 2016 budget. We did make a mistake in the budget. We actually had an asphalt overlay program for Fire Station 2 that was wrongly included in a line item. So we'll transfer monies where they need to go. It won't increase the dollars. But we wanted to make sure that we were able to move ahead with this if at all possible.
Okay. It sounds good to me. I have no questions.
Yeah, after seeing the show and tell from last time with the clunky, heavy existing
Yeah.
thermal imagers, I think this is something really needed for health and safety of the citizens of town and allowing the firefighters to do their job better, and I'm all in favor of it, big time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We'll move that forward, and also on the
agenda?
consent agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now, Gary, you're going to present the next number, item 5, which is a request to lease the parking lot by Rance and Ray's Brewery and Restaurant.
Yes, I think I have a sketch up here. I'd ask Mr. Marzolf to come forward if he would. Thank you. Neil Marzolf and his wife have purchased, if you can hand me that, Neil.
Sure thing.
Have purchased the old Culligan building on Jackson Street, and they wish to start a brewery restaurant in that building. At the time they purchased the building, Mr. Marzolf checked on the building codes and so on and so forth, and unfortunately didn't check on the zoning codes, which require that there are 9 parking spaces that are required as part of that business. So he has attempted to meet his parking requirement by talking to adjacent property owners who weren't either interested in leasing parking. He talked to the recycling center and LSI. Of course, LSI doesn't own that piece of property, so they aren't free to lease it, and the recycling center, we don't want to tie up for the length of time that it would be necessary to be utilized for that purpose. So we looked around as he indicated that he was having a problem getting that, meeting that requirement. Staff took a look at assets the city might have in the area as well. And this is the southbound couplet. This is the C Street right-of-way, of course. When ITD constructed the couplet, there was a remnant piece from a piece of property they purchased off. This was a used equipment lot at the time, owned by the Helpling brothers. They purchased enough property for the right-of-way, and this is a remnant that was left over. In 2002, I can't remember the exact time, but at that time, ITD and the city had an agreement that if there were remnants of property within the city that ITD did not need for their purposes, they would deed those over to the city because they're just an asset that they can't use and they have responsibility for. So we had several pieces of property come into possession of the city at that time, and of course when ITD needs property for installation of signal boxes, things like that, and needs property from the city, we work with them on that as well. It's a symbiotic relationship.
That's how we got the triangle over by CJ's.
Exactly, and that's the piece of property I was going to bring up as well. That came into our possession at that time, and that was a leftover remnant from the northbound part of the couplet at the 8th Street right-of-way. The city has leased in the past that property to Phil Roderick of CJ's for additional parking. So there is some precedence for this. At this point, this property came to the city by means of a deed from ITD. It is not public right-of-way. It is actually city property, having been the subject of a quitclaim deed, and the city is free to lease it or use it for whatever it wants. So Mr. Marzolf is here asking that the city consider allowing him to utilize that, leasing that as a parking lot. Bill Belknap, our zoning administrator, has indicated that the parking lot being across an inactive right-of-way, the C Street right-of-way remnant, it would not require a CUP, so that takes one step out of the process. Les McDonald and his staff have laid out some different configurations for the lot. It is paved at this time, correct? So it will hold almost exactly 9 parking spaces. He's required to have 8 regular spaces and 1 ADA space. Les and his staff have laid out some configurations that will allow that, that will fit on that piece of property. One would be a ADA accessible space somewhere in this area. The other parking space would be along this configuration, at least preliminarily. Now, there are some challenges to the lot. One is there is a streetlight standard, a luminaire in this area that may have to be moved. So, Mr. Marzolf, if the council wants to move ahead with this, then that does need to be moved. That, of course, would be his expense to do that. It'll have to be striped in accordance with whatever engineering and community development require as well. So it is available for lease if the council wants to proceed in that fashion. Mr. Marzolf would like to have a determination as quickly as possible, so what we thought we would do is bring it to you to see if you're interested in doing it. If you're interested in doing it, then we will begin to discuss with him the terms of the lease. Of course, the terms of the lease that we would need to look at is the length of the lease. Bill has indicated on behalf of community development, in order for essentially the parking is required for Mr. Marzolf's prospective use. So the length of the lease would have to be commensurate with the use of this building. So I've talked preliminarily with Mr. Marzolf, indicating that probably a 5-year lease is what staff would recommend to the council. He appears to be comfortable with that. We haven't yet talked about improvements, but we'll talk about that and talk about an annual lease rate as well. So we're here essentially asking if that is your direction, then we will begin discussions on how to bring a formal proposal to the council on the 8th of September.
Well, in a word, yes. I'm absolutely interested in doing it. But I have some questions, too. What about the rest of that lot? It just kind of seems like it's kind of a free-for-all.
This here?
And then where the white car is to the west of the line.
Here.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is the public right-of-way, and this is public right-of-way.
But there's parking where that white car is. There's people park along in there.
Certainly. And I haven't discussed with Public Works or Community Development how that would be addressed, but typically the city will allow use of a public right-of-way pursuant to an encroachment permit. And that encroachment permit, of course, is if the city ever needs it, you have to vacate it. We have those around town, typically for awnings. The Corner Club is utilizing part of the A Street right-of-way where they have their outdoor area. That was done years and years ago by the council, and it's subject to an encroachment permit. We see it for retaining walls. If it is not a temporary it's not a permanent encroachment, Les McDonald has the ability as Public Works Director to grant those encroachment permits for minor encroachments. So there are some options here. Certainly the public can continue to park on here as long as the council allows them to do that. This will have to be restricted parking to the Rants and Raves installation. C Street, there are some options. The options are the adjacent property owners could move for vacation of that right-of-way if they wanted to in the future. Now, it does serve this alley back here, so there needs to be public ingress and egress out of there. So those are considerations that can be considered in the future. For the instant case, to meet the needs of the business here, the council does have the ability to lease this property if you want us to proceed.
Just a couple of questions, I guess. Currently, you've got H&R Block and State Farm, and I guess still the barber shop in the same building, but mostly H&R Block and State Farm. What would become of their ability to access parking in there as a result of this?
You could, Bill's here, he might be best to address that question too.
And
but
so,
again, this is not, it's not property that is specifically for any business in the, that's located in the area.
I guess the difficulty is it seems to be a little bit of a helter-skelter, and to really advance this cause, I'm in agreement with Wayne that it's something I don't have objection to, but I'd like to see it looked at more holistically and see if something more coherent could be overlaid on the entire series of ownerships and everything
because
else.
The question begs to be asked is, what about the rest of the businesses, and don't they have to provide parking too, and how are they?
Well, I could say that they're all tenants of ours, so I'm pretty familiar with how they operate. H&R Block has 6 weeks a year that they're busy. Right now, I see they bring one car in 1 day a week, and that's it. That's all you see from them. So 10 and a half months a year, there's essentially no business there. Kazumi's, all of her customers park right in front of her shop. Pretty much, she's just one vehicle at a time. And so there is a lot of parking that is not utilized going down Jackson Street there, and that's typically where I see everyone parking.
Same with farmers.
Yeah, and farmers,
State
there's,
Farm.
or State Farm, yeah.
Oh, it is?
sorry.
Yeah, State Farm.
I see they have usually one or two vehicles in the lot. Typically one person working, and then they'll have a customer come periodically. But we don't own that particular building, so that's actually owned separately.
But my question still, though, Bill, is are those businesses, even though they don't have much parking needed, are they still required to provide designated parking off-street?
The subject property is located in the motor business zoning district, so off-street parking is required. We have a building here that is what we consider to be a non-conforming structure, in that the building occupies the entirety of the property, and there is no on-premise or off-street parking that's provided. What's driving the demand here is the change of use or occupancy. So what we look at and how the zoning code looks at is if you're going to change or expand a use, even though you may not be compliant with prior parking standards or providing enough parking for the current use, you are only required or obligated to provide enough parking for the differential increase from the existing use to the new proposed use. So the change from Culligan to a brewery or restaurant is that 9 spaces is the differential increase. So those are the only number of spaces that are required. The total number that would be required are actually higher than that, but that's really the difference between the prior use of the structure and the proposed new use. And so that's the obligation, is to provide those off-street parking, and that's where the situation is. For the other existing uses, as long as they continue in the existing use, there's no change. They're just considered to be a non-conforming use in the fact that they don't have their own off-street parking. The only time that would become a challenge would be if they change their nature of their use to one that has a higher off-street parking requirement, and again, you'd be in the same position of trying to provide that additional parking.
Okay.
So is there any way, as we proceed through this, to look at that entire larger site and try to make something a little more coherent and long-term usable, rather than just carving out the one triangle and then it's a free-for-all around the rest of it, which could be nothing but trouble?
If I may, the parking lot concepts that we laid out actually looked at all of that property, not just the triangle. And really it's important, because when you look at the shape of the triangle, you know, the stalls would be set in this way, just like these cars are parked, and that in and of itself doesn't function, because you got to get out, you got to go somewhere. And so the layouts that we looked at did include stalls all the way along here. In some cases they include a stall here, which may be an ADA parking stall, and then some form of parking up here, typically parallel curbside parking rather than nose in like you're seeing here. So that all in combination was part of the layout for the possible lot configuration. So we've got 2 or 3 different versions, with the idea that access would come in either from here or from the alley, and then this would be a one-way, most likely out to the south, which is then of course a one-way south here on Jackson Street. There's not enough width here to really make a good 2-way layout, so the ones that really provided the number of stalls was a one-way south, striping here, and then the option of striping here to address some of those other uses that you're referring to.
For me.
Gary?
Is it possible, Les, if we wanted to take a bigger concept here, as long as we retain... Wow.
Gary speaks, the projector
Anyway,
fails.
if it is possible to lay out a larger concept, and perhaps the lease could address the triangle, the spaces could be marked individually as being spaces for the business, and the city retained the right to utilize that area, as you just said, for a southwest egress out of the lot. Would it be possible to do that?
I'm not quite sure I caught all of that. Try again.
See,
please.
More of a visual guy, Les.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is could you put individual signs in front of the 8 parking spaces,
Right.
and retain the ability,
Yes.
even though this would be leased to Mr. Marzal, retain the ability for anybody parking in this area to also utilize that?
Yeah, I think you would have to do that. I mean,
Okay.
it would be the aisle that would serve the entire parking lot, but those 8 stalls that are located within the triangle would be within the lease agreement. But I think the agreement would have to say that, yes, the aisle remains open to,
So there's
access.
nothing preventing the city as a public entity to putting whatever parking they want in this area. It's still public
Certainly.
property, public
Absolutely.
right-of-way, and could utilize it for whatever they wanted. So you could go ahead and put some parking up here, public parking.
Public parking or just, open parking. And essentially, it would be along the sidewalk, and again, as I noted, parallel. And the reason for that is you have to have the access for the alley, an aisle coming down from the alley to get through as well. Because of the alley coming here,
Sure.
there has to be a route out. So you have an aisle through here between what would most likely be parallel to the curb, parallel to the sidewalk parking here, and these nose-in stalls, 90-degree stalls here.
So you just
And
have
then
a
an
more,
aisle south on out.
so you just have more organized parking scheme
Absolutely.
in that area.
Yes, and it would cover the entire area, the entire parking lot that's out there today.
Seems
Just
to
a
me that-
portion of it would be within the least.
Trying to put parallel parking along that sidewalk makes it somewhat difficult to access it, because most of the people are going to come in off Jackson, so then they're going to come in off Jackson and swing in, and they got to try to pull some kind of a U-turn in there, because I'm assuming that the parallel parking would face towards the west.
Presumably,
So
yes.
that gets to be kind of, I drove into that lot this afternoon just to kind of get a feel for it, because I haven't been in it for a while. And it's a little tight.
And it's not that big.
Yeah.
It's not that big.
And so, what I'm thinking right now, and I think Art's got an idea. I think the city should look at this in its whole as to what is the best way to utilize it. But in the meantime, let's let him move forward with this triangle. Let's get a lease done for him, and then as we can move along at a later date, maybe the city can figure out something else to do, Gary.
That brings up, thought just occurred to me that we've never been in the business of leasing individual parking spaces. That's why we looked at the entire property. So that may be a discussion we can have as staff, as long, again, as it's off of public right-of-way. That's a concept maybe the city attorney would like to discuss, and then the city could retain all of the rights in that property except for those individual parking spaces. Again, just a concept, and that's something we can talk about and flesh out before we come to council.
Another option perhaps would be to not lease the entire triangle, but maybe you just
Certainly.
lease the piece that would contain the stalls.
You bet.
And then you're not leasing individual stalls, but a portion
Okay.
of city property.
Well, I think that's all good discussion, and I think the city needs to have that internal discussion with staff. But in the meantime, I don't want to see Mr. Marzoff get tied up in a bunch of bureaucracy here. Let's just he's going to get what he needs as far as a lease, whether it's
You know, sit
temporary
down and
thing
work it.
until we decide something else, or that's what it's going to be. But let's let him moved forward.
Okay.
So I think, moving forward, working with Mr. Marzoff in the city to get a lease determined, working with engineering community development to get the optimal layout for things, take advantage of the whole site, and I think everybody's needs can be addressed most optimally that way.
Okay, I want to take the opportunity to compliment staff on their ability to get this together very quickly, and I think
I think that
that
was great.
Les
Good
and
job.
Bill's staff have done a really good job on that.
So that's, he obviously had an issue and a problem, staff took care of it. I think that's great.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we can put that on the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks.
Okay, and number 6 item is the Southeast Moscow Water and Sewer District, a dissolution discussion.
Yeah, it'll be fine. We'll
Wes
put it back.
McDonald. And Rod, you going to join us on this too? I know it sooner or later you will, so you might as well make it sooner. Thank you, Becky, for your presentation.
Oh, this can't be good. Rod showed up with documents.
No, they were same documents you guys were provided. They were just printed.
But it looks more dangerous on paper than in a computer.
Certainly more permanent.
Yes.
All right, good afternoon.
Okay, let's
Again.
go on it.
Well, this is a topic that we have touched on before. It's one that the City Council has looked at extensively in years past, and that has come around again for consideration. And this has to do with our friends to the southeast, the Southeast Moscow Water and Sewer District. As you'll recall, the district is located south, for the most part, south of Highway 8, the Troy Road, down in this area in its original configuration. Zoom in just a little bit here. The original district areas here, a little bit to the north of State Highway 8, mostly to the south, west of Linville, including Carmichael, Tomer Road, Lundquist Lane, some of those areas we were just talking about a few minutes ago. And then eventually the district expanded to include some additional areas, Ridgeview First Edition, parts of the Parker Farm owned by the University of Idaho, and others. So that's generally the boundary of the district as it exists today. The discussion today is going to be essentially the beginning of what will be, I think, a fairly in-depth discussion with the council with regard to the future of the district as seen by the city of Moscow. I will tell you that the district has approached us, talked with us again. It was actually Council Member Steed that asked that we once again tackle the question about the future of the district, and some district representatives are here. Lois Pritchard is the president of the board, I believe, still. And we've had some initial discussions there about, is the district willing to have that discussion again about where are they going, should they continue to operate, should there something else happen. So today is intended to kind of kick off that discussion at the council level in terms of where we go from here. So we'll start with a little bit of background to just catch everybody up to what we're doing. And in the council packet, there's a fairly lengthy, what I call a white paper, which has all of this information in much detail, a lot of the history of what we've done in the past and things to consider. But for the purpose of discussion today and the audience, I want to bring forward some of that information in a more brief form to help everybody understand what we're talking about. So, Sewer District, formed by order of the District Court in June of 1974. So it goes back quite a ways. The district was expanded, as I mentioned a moment ago, showing on the map, several times, including in 1976, before any facilities were constructed, in 1981, and again in 1990, the last one there, I believe, being the Ridgeview 2 edition, or Ridgeview number 1 edition, excuse me. The system within the district was constructed starting in 1980, late 80, and completed in 1981. It consists of a series of collection system pipes, gravity pipe flow system through most of those streets that you saw on the map, all terminating in a pump station located on Palouse River Drive. It's what we call a duplex station, has 2 pumps within it. That then discharges into a force main that extends over 5,000 feet west on Palouse River Drive and north on Mountain View Road, crossing State Highway 8 and tying into the city system south of the White Avenue intersection, so near our cemetery well site. The city, interestingly enough, something I found out in doing the research on this go-round, the city participated in some of the costs of that system. They participated in the oversizing of a collection main on White Avenue, and in the size of the pump station and the size of the force main. So they made the force main larger, and they went to a larger pump size within the station. On White Avenue, there was an existing 10-inch sewer main that the district was going to connect to in order to have capacity sufficient to serve the district. It was going to be sized as a 10-inch main going west from Mountain View on White Avenue. The city opted to increase the size of that to an 18-inch in anticipation of future growth out of that part of the community. So those were the 3 things that the city participated in, made a payment to the district back in about 1981 for upsizing those systems.
Do you recall how much that payment was last?
I believe it was in the range of about $12,000 back at that time. And so, as far as I can tell, prices have gone up a bit since then, a few decades. As far as I can tell, the intention was that they wanted to make sure that there was capacity available that could, in essence, be used by the city above and beyond what the district was paying for and building for future use, whether it would be out-of-district service coming through, or if someday the city took over the district and it was being expanded further on, any number of possibilities there. So near as I can tell anyway, based on the council record and the information that I have turned up, it does appear that the city did make that payment to the district and that those lines and pump stations were enlarged.
Where's the pump
To
station?
accommodate. It is on Palouse River Drive, located, here's Carmichael, it's right about there. So it would be about south of Ridgeview Road. And then, of course, Mountain View is over in this area.
So it comes down and hits Mountain View, then it comes up over Mountain View and then down to White Avenue.
Yeah, all of this, let me go back one, it's not going to help me much. All of this area drains south because it's all in the Palouse River drainage area. Of course, Palouse River is down here, and so it all drains towards the river. So this is the low point in the system. Goes into a force main, runs along Palouse River Drive to Mountain View, north on Mountain View, crosses State Highway 8, and ties in up near but south of the White Avenue intersection.
Okay.
Okay, so that was the system constructed in 1981. In that same time frame, the city and the district were discussing how they could interact because the district has a collection system but not a treatment system. So how would the sewage that was collected within the district boundaries be treated? So the city and the district entered into an agreement in October of 1980 that said that, yes, the city will take the flow from the district. We will convey it through our conveyance system, our pipe network, out to the treatment plant and then treat that flow just like we do other flow within the city limits. Within that contract, there are any number of provisions talking about how we would manage that, what do we do with capital needs, what we do with maintenance, those types of things. And the city did agree to actually operate and maintain the system. So that was in the original 1980 agreement. That agreement was renewed in 1991, so about a decade later. Generally the same agreement, updated some of the language, a few provisions here and there, but again continuing the service from the city that we would operate it, maintain it, and also perform billing operations for customers with a $1 surcharge on each monthly bill for those that are outside the city limits but within the district. We would also have some surcharges related to things like sewer taps and permits that were being issued in the district. The agreement also said that we would administer the issuance of building permits or sewer permits for connections to the district system. So in essence, we're treating it really just like a city system, but under contract with the owners, which would be the sewer district. That 91 agreement was slated to expire a few years back. It has, through multiple extensions, been extended to the end of September of 2015, so about 5-6 weeks out, not all that far. Also, during the time frame that was going on, a draft contract was developed. Actually, I put it together back and finished it back in June of 2014. That would replace, or was proposed to replace, the 1991 agreement. It carried forward a lot of those same provisions, but also added a few other features that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. In 2008, as a request from the district, the city considered whether or not to absorb the district, to take it over. It made it to the city council. There was much discussion about that at that time and a lot of issues. So they included things such as annexation. If the city was going to take over the area, should the property be annexed? The original agreement and the 91 agreement both stated that if the district were to dissolve or if the city chose to annex the property, that the district would not fight that annexation. However, that only ties the district to that type of an agreement. That does not apply to individual property owners within the district boundaries.
Unless, excuse me, that was included in the original agreement back in 1980 as well.
1980 and then again in the 1991.
And that would probably explain why they did the oversizing. They were the Local Land Use Planning Act in the 1970s, or in the early 70s, came into existence, so communities started thinking long-term in planning, and so that was all long-term planning issues that they addressed at an early time period.
So within the district city contract, it contemplated how that would be addressed with the district, but did not and could not address the specific property owners because that's separate. So that became an issue in 2008, and a lot of discussion revolved around that. Should the city annex if the district goes away? Well, there was a certain perception, I guess, that was received by the district board and by the city, that a lot of the residents out there were not interested in annexation. They did not want to come into the city. So that was something that came up then, and frankly it will come up again as we carry this forward. There were other issues related to that, such as rates and connection fees, and depending on whether you annex or not, what rates do you charge? And again, that's something that we'll need to talk about further with this new consideration. Obviously, there would be a transfer of assets of the district facilities to the city, which would make sense because otherwise we're not really taking it over. We're just doing something else. One of the discussion items was, what were the conditions of the assets? Were they in good shape? And the assessments at the time said yes, they were in pretty good shape. And that made sense. It's a fairly new system. Been maintained all the way through, per city standards, and so overall in pretty good condition. Another consideration was the street system in the highway district. Most of those lines are located within the public right-of-way as owned by or administered by the North Latah County Highway District, not the city or not the county. So if the city was to take over the district with annexation, then they become city streets. Is that a good thing or not? Well, depends on how you look at it. They're not up to city standard, but the sewers are located within what would then be city streets. If the area was not annexed, then we would own utilities located outside city limits but within the district, highway district, rights-of-way, which is how the sewer district operates today. And that's okay. We just require some agreements with the highway district. It somewhat complicates things like street closures and restoration when you're doing maintenance, those types of things, maintenance and repairs. But it's a consideration along the way. And then there were some other discussions about, okay, should we be looking at other city services? Police, fire, garbage, all those kind of things. Again, if you annex, that's a pretty straight-cut answer, straightforward. If you don't annex, is that a consideration at all? Or does it just stay as is as a county facility, and we're just running a sewer system? So those types of things were discussed pretty extensively back in 2008, and in the end, the council voted to reject the request from the district to annex. I think a lot of the reason that rejection happened was because we could not really come up with an answer on the rates question versus the annexation question. If you annex, it's easy. If they don't want to be annexed, great. Now what do you charge for rates? The current city fee schedules, as we've adopted for many years, have said if you're outside the city limits, you pay double rates. Well, that was not well received. And so then that was one of the areas we struggled with. And again, it's a question we'll have to address this time around. So the contract renewal, in anticipation that, okay, we weren't going to annex, and so we wrote a new contract back in 2014. It said a lot of similar things as the previous contracts with respect to city management, city administration, permitting, all of those types of things. What would the rates be, which currently it's the current city rate plus the dollar surcharge. We had proposed that it would go to a $2 surcharge, escalation of costs, in the new contract. But a lot of the processes, a lot of the fees, all being essentially the same, but just updated from the previous contracts. There were a couple of additions, though, that were going to be changes. One of the big things we see, and it's been coming along for a while, is this question of out-of-district flows. So out-of-district flows. So if a property that is located outside the city limits today, well, let me restate that. If there's a property that's located outside of the district boundary, and it is annexed by the city, so Ridgeview number 2, for instance, currently outside the district boundary, annexed into the city, been platted, where's its sewer service coming from? Well, it flows to the south, just like Ridgeview 1 would, which means it has to pass through the district facilities to get to the city, most logically. I mean, you could do something else, pump it over the hill, but it makes the most sense to carry it south into the district system, pass it through the district system, and back into the city and on its way. So how do you deal with that? Well, the contract didn't address that, the previous contracts. So there's now a section within that draft contract, the 14 contract, that does address how you deal with out-of-district flows or pass-through flows of city flow going through the district and back into the city. Along with that then becomes, okay, what do you charge people for that? When you're connecting to the system, We have connection fees for the city called general facilities charges. The district also has connection fees. Right now, we're in the sharing mechanism. If somebody's in the district connecting, they get some, we get some. If they're outside the district but passing through, well, the district should get some compensation, and so should the city. So those kind of things are also considered within that draft contract. Now, whether what's in there would be what we'd finally end up with, I don't know, but my proposals there as to how we would address those issues. So that's all in that 2014 draft.
Les, if I may.
Go ahead, Gary.
Now, Ridgeview 1 was originally within the boundaries of the district, correct?
No. I believe there was a small portion on the very south end along the highway that was. The district was expanded to include Ridgeview 1, even though it was annexed into the city, and there were some issues about dealing with that once that developed. But no, the district boundary was extended to include it so that they could serve it. And that is an option today, still, even under the proposed 14 agreement, where I've said, hey, we'll just pass through. The other option would be to have the district keep expanding to serve those areas as they develop. The question becomes, do we want more district facilities located within city limits, and the dichotomy that creates? There may be some areas also as the city develops east of Mountain View and kind of goes over that crest into the Kinworthy properties and out towards Mill Road, that it may not make sense for the district to ever expand that far north, and yet we have to serve that area with sewer. Well, again, physically, topographically, it makes sense to go south, pass through the district, and go on its way. So there's a couple of options there.
We've got about 15 minutes, so
Okay.
I'll leave some time for discussion.
Yep,
so.
I'm just about to wrap it up here. So one of the questions, again, system condition, we've looked at it again in recent years. Overall, the system is in pretty good condition. Again, we've maintained it since 1981, so it's had consistent maintenance. There are some minor issues starting to develop, but nothing real significant. Looking a little further out, capital needs-wise, if the city was to take over the system, there may come a time that the size of the station or the force main could be inadequate if we put enough flow through the system, that Mill Road going on north. So there could potentially be a need to upgrade the capacity in those components at some time. But there also is the potential that as the line from the area of the south lift station near the state or US 95 comes east up Palouse River Drive or up the South Fork, and eventually reaches this location, that station would be decommissioned and just tied to the gravity system.
Then along with that question, that Thompson property that's been platted for development, is that going to be on the sewer district also?
Well, it drains to the south as well, and
Right.
so that's, yes, that's an issue as well to consider. So the current discussion then takes us to dissolution topics, and as we go into this again, as I mentioned, annexation is going to be a big one again. If the city does annex, obviously there's some benefit of property taxes that are gained. It's all residential, mostly residential property, so it's not a large windfall, if you will. It helps cover some expenses. We would, if we annexed it, need to extend additional city services out there. Again, police, fire, what happens when they want water, because there's no water on a public system out there today, garbage, things of that nature. What are the impacts on rates, whether we annex or we don't annex? That's a consideration. You deal with connection fees, and really the interest of the district patrons. Would they want to be annexed or not? Just like before, that's going to be something that we're probably going to want to talk about. On the rates issue, if we annexed it, would be simple city rates, pretty straightforward. If we don't annex it, it's much more complicated. Do we charge city rates alone, which are less than what they're paying today? Do we charge city rates with some kind of a surcharge, which would be the current system? Do we double the city rates as our per current fee schedule? Or do we do some graduated surcharge in between what we're charging now and the double? Maybe it's a 50% surcharge or a 20 or a 70, I don't know. That's something we'll have to sort our way through. And then somewhat of a sidebar, but it's an issue for us, is delinquency. There are situations where we have people that don't pay their bills. If they're in the city limits and they're on the water system, it's pretty straightforward. You don't pay your bills, pretty soon we turn your water off. It's no longer a problem. Out in the district, we're not providing water. The district does not provide water, so there's not that opportunity. Well, right now, the option we have is that the district, as a taxing authority, has the ability to take delinquent bills to the county, have it put on the county property tax assessments, and retrieve it that way. It's long, it takes years sometimes to get through that process, but it is there. If it's the city, and we've annexed it, and we don't serve water, then really the only thing we can do is just plug the lines. And there's a method to do that, and it's legal to do that based on our interpretation from our legal office. So there's a mechanism to do that. The legal process, that's what Rod's here and Gary's here to talk about as needed. There is a dissolution process stipulated through state statutes, as I understand it. The question of can we provide service outside of city boundaries has been answered by Idaho Department of Environmental Quality to say yes, you can. It's within your service areas, you define it. And then, of course, the question of legal processes associated with annexation, whether it's a forced annexation or voluntary annexation. Those could come into the discussion. And so really it comes down to a summary of kind of two questions. Does the city want to absorb the district?
Same question we've asked at least 4 times since 2007.
And if so, in what manner? Annexation or not?
Yep.
And what do you do with rates? And obviously all the associated issues that come with it. So there you go. There's the history and the primer and the setup for the discussion of how we want to move forward.
Well, obviously, this is going to go before the full council for discussion.
At some point.
Well,
We're looking for additional direction at this point.
My feelings, I'll start off.
Would you like to bring Lois up representing the district to sit at the table?
I will in a moment. Once Lois can hear what I have to say, and possibly Art, then Lois may have some other things she wants to say. I'm still not up for annexation. I never have been in favor of annexing it because it would most likely be a forced annexation, and we know that in 8 years, I don't know of any time we've ever done that, and it's been longer than that. I don't like forced annexation. It's a money loser for the city to be annexed into the city because of all the other services that we would have to supply to it. I still have a question as to whether the city would want to absorb the streets. I don't think the streets are up to the standards of city standards are. We still, of course, have the concern, though, that if the district is dissolved and the city takes it over without annexation, we have all the items that you brought up. And so, Art, do you have any preliminary comments?
Just the fact that we've been kicking this one down the road for years, and it's clear that sooner or later we're going to have to subsume and bring in the Southeast Sewer District. And that writing is on the wall. It's just the mechanism. How are we going to do this gracefully without causing too much hubbub? And it's going to be a mess no matter how you cut it. But I think we really have to stop signing contract extensions and just get down to the dirty work of figuring out how to do this. And I'm with you. I'm not big on annexation, but subsuming the district, probably going to have to do it sooner or later.
Lois, come on up.
Can I add something to that?
Go ahead, Rod.
I don't think that's quite like you said it, Art, because, I mean, we do have a contract. We could have a contract until someday there is, they get surrounded when they get, annexed into the city, or it can be dissolved and the city can take it. So, I mean, there's at least a couple different options to go. So someday down in the future, I would definitely think that the way the city's growing in that direction, that it will probably be annexed into the city.
That's kind of been my thoughts. Lois, name and address, please.
Lois Pritchett, 2970 Highway 8. I'm in the Southeast Sewer District. I am the president. Our concerns are we annexed in Ridgeview Phase 1. We've also approved to have Phase 2 annexed into, which is Thompson's. That has 44 parcels, the other one 30-some in Phase 1. That puts over almost 80 on our system that is not outside. I mean, the people outside the district are less now than city people. We were also approached by Logos School, which is that area, you can show them down there, and They are interested in being annexed, and we put it on hold because now we're getting all this traffic on our system, and it's city traffic, not outside. And that's where we're coming in like, hey, we are no longer our district. It's mainly city on it now.
So that begs the question I have, Les, is the capacity of the system for continued growth.
Yeah, in the comprehensive sewer system plan, we did an analysis of the district facilities as well as our own in terms of capacity. And currently, the system out there is running capacities that are, or flows that are less than 50% of the capacity. So we're in pretty good shape for a while.
And that school one would be a big one. They told us right now Logos runs at 350 students, but if the school goes in there, and I don't know what the process is now, the major or the most would be 600 students. But you aren't talking flushing once a day when you put a school on there, like you do with houses. I mean, the extra. So there is real problem coming in with sewer out in that area.
Gary?
Yeah, this is, Lois and I have had a ton of discussions, as we did with the previous administration of the district, and it truly is a really complex issue. Lois makes a good point. The asset was constructed by the district for district patrons. We negotiated a deal with the district, although we did add some oversizing costs, so I think some of that capacity rightfully is the, maybe not owner, city isn't the owner of that capacity, but certainly we have some ability to use it. I agree with Rod that we're not at a situation where we have to subsume the district unless the council wants to. Back in 2008, you heard Randy Fife and I discuss with you the complications of annexing or taking that system over. Les indicated that DEQ has said that, okay, yeah, you can take that flow, you can define your service area. Once you define that service area, you essentially have to provide the service. And the reason the district is there is because of the individual septic systems were essentially making the groundwater unsafe to drink. So district comes to the city, we weren't ready to annex it, came to the city and said, hey, if we set this up, we get a working agreement with you, if you guys maintain it, and we'll pay you to maintain it essentially, will you take the flows? And so we did that. Now we're to the point where the district was very active. When Kathleen Warnick was in here several years ago, the district was essentially dormant and didn't even have current elections. They're a governmental entity, taxing entity just like the North Latah Highway District. So I think it's one of those situations that's complicated by the fact that now you have city properties that we would like to utilize that system that we maintain. The flows go into the same place. So does that relationship force us or encourage us to do something different than what's been done before? The way the contract is written now, we take the flows, we maintain the system. The district is responsible for major issues. So if the lift station goes down, then the district has some responsibility for that. Now, in reality, what will likely happen is we'll discuss it, negotiate it, and deal with it that way. But it's obvious, or it was in 08 at least, that the people in the district don't want to be annexed into the city because they're going to pay additional city taxes. I take a little bit of issue with Les's term as it wouldn't be a windfall, because property taxes in residential areas are not a windfall. They don't even pay for the services. So you get to the point where you're taking over a rural highway that we will be responsible to maintain. You've got all the other services, the sanitation, water, and sewer eventually. Begs the question as well, if they're annexed into the city, then we will actively extend water service to that area. So those are all costs. Then you get into the development issues. Right now...
This is all if it's annexed.
Well, even if it's... Well, yes, if it's annexed. If it isn't annexed, well, excuse me, if we take over the system and don't annex the property, remember that we have an area city impact agreement that we can suggest, we can ask the county to adopt our codes, but it's the county who administers the codes in that area. In other words, building permit comes in, application, we'll review it, we'll make recommendations, but it's Latah County that makes the decision. There is a lot of undeveloped and underdeveloped property within the Southeast Moscow Sewer District. So if someone comes in and they want to build a 120-unit apartment on an undeveloped piece of property, or where there is a single-family dwelling at this point, how do we deal with that? What is the capacity of that system? If they were formerly in the district, are they going to have the right, if you will, to say, I was in the district, you subsumed the asset, now you have to let me hook into it, even though we don't have control of the building codes or the zoning in that area. Mm-hmm. So it is this huge, complex issue that, much as we'd love to help the Southeast Moscow Sewer District, unless we can find some way to deal with those issues, it's staff's recommendation that we negotiate a deal with the district for allowing those city flows to pass through, and Les has a draft contract that we can continue to work on with the district. But that would be the best situation now. And then as properties go out there and they want city water, of course, we won't provide them city water unless they annex. That's the way we expand in an orderly fashion. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it makes the district continue to be a governmental entity, and they will have to continue to have their elections meet the Secretary of State's rules under the Idaho Code, and continue to maintain their governmental status.
And just what Gary said, they are a governmental entity. They have certain powers just like the city has. If the city takes it over, we wouldn't have the same powers that the district has, because then it would just be part of our proprietary function, part of a business, and we would just be a business out there. We wouldn't have the authority that they would have, what they could do on compelling connection and way they run their
You still see the biggest
entity.
problem being the flow-through issue, which is going to be could eventually become a big sticking point.
If I may, I can tell that one of the issues that you guys are having is if we ever get to the capacity issue where the city flows through, force it to the point where you have to then tear it out and put a bigger pipe in, is the district going to have to pay for that? As far as I'm concerned, we can likely, in a contract, talk about that future issue.
And the draft contract does address that issue. If there is a need for capacity expansion, how that is done and what the financial picture is.
So if there is to be an additional contract, is it going to be an annual contract like we work on 2014 to 15?
No, we typically set them up as a 10-year term and
This
renewable.
is getting ponderous quickly.
But the capacity won't be reached for a long time.
Right.
So, I mean, the contract would anticipates that not happening for at least 20 years.
And nobody has an interest in having the district pay for the city's need for capacity. But in all reality, the district, like everybody else, like we have our own sewer pipes, they get old, they wear out, and those maintenance issues
They would become the city's.
Let's invite Dawn up. We've got just a couple minutes left, and then we're going to have to run this down. So, Dawn, if you want to come up and make some very short, concise, to-the-point comments. Dawn, I'm talking to.
Lois and Gary and Les have made some really good arguments about everything. A lot of it would be solved with annexation. One of the financial considerations that just occurred to me is that, and we just did this analysis during the 2016 budget adoption, was 8 years ago when we looked at this, annexation was like avoidance. We're not going to do annexation. And council's always been fearful of doing annexations. Everything that we've talked about today is solved through annexation. And as Lois pointed out, a lot of these developments are coming on track, and there's going to be the district size is going to be smaller unless they grow the district, which I don't know, that's one of the things I'm talking about. But annexation becomes more and more possible, okay, because of development. And so the $200,000 home, for example, the property taxes on that is about $500. Okay, when you consider the homeowner's exemption and everything else. When you consider the doubling of the rates, you're well over $1,200 for that same property because you're doubling the sewer rates. So now it becomes a financial decision that is it a financial decision because it's cheaper to be annexed into the city, except for the things, and then Gary's right about the street and all of that, but then, or is it an emotional issue? And so that's the decision I think we've always been perplexed with, is that we don't want to force annexation, but a lot of the things that Les and Gary's pointed out is right on track, but you take the issue of annexation away and have an annexation agreement with those other parcels that are remnants now, it takes away that decision.
Looks to me like we're in basically in the same situation we've been in for a number of years. We're not ready to annex it by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot of questions that we still have as far as the ramifications of taking it over and with the district being dissolved. This is not a situation now where I can see that this committee can make any kind of a recommendation at all. I think that if we're going to continue to move forward with this and move forward with the discussions, that probably a city council workshop with the district and staff is probably more in order, where we can sit down, not limited by time frame, and have a discussion and really hammer out what we're going to do. So I think if you agree with me, our recommendation right now is to leave things as they are, continue on with the contract, with a new contract. Rod?
The contract ends on September 30th, so
Right.
that's an issue.
So the point is to rewrite it basically like it is, or give us a recommendation not changing very much right now. I don't think we're at a point where we can change anything, Gary.
Yeah, fall's always a terrible time, especially September for workshops, but I know the council doesn't want to do this. I'm sure the district's tired of signing extensions, but if you wanted to have a workshop, say in October, that we could get a mutual time with the district, we could set a workshop then, extend this thing out again till January 1 or whatever.
We've done that in the past. I don't have any problem with an extension.
We have, and we can, I think, Lois, have you seen the draft contract? Okay, so it's a matter of coming in with all these options and saying, okay, we can address it this way, this way, this way, or this way. We can certainly do that, and if that's how you want to proceed.
Sound right?
It is.
Okay, so be it.
So we will bring, on the 8th, we will bring an extension again, Lois, till January 1 or somewhere around there. Have the workshop, and then we'll have a direction.
I would recommend January 30th, first of the year, is always
Fair
a hard
enough.
time to do.
Good.
Okay,
Thank
very
you.
good. Well, that being said, this committee stands adjourned. Thank you.
No report.